Here. Do you want me to call to order or just the roll call or just note that who's here?
Oh, well, since we can see it, I guess go ahead and call them out. I think that would be nice in just for the recording.
Okay, all right. Alfreda,
Present.
Eleanor.
Here.
Okay, Gloria. And then I'm here. Melina. Mary.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, who is this?
Yeah.
This
Okay.
is Melina. I don't think you guys are gonna be able to see me.
Okay.
Okay, we can hear you. Mary.
Present.
Else. Megan. Monica.
Present. Present.
Okay, all right. Okay. All right, and so you want to go all the way down to Carol, where you be giving the presentations or receive from the staff for road bylaws application and review process.
So yes, because I'm realizing I did not send y'all the November 10th, 2020 minutes. So we'll have to do that at the next meeting.
Okay.
Sorry about that. Okay. So I'll go ahead and start. Thank you all for coming. What I'll be doing, I don't really have a presentation for you. What I'm going to do is walk you through the board book and talk through the processes. And so hopefully y'all each have yours in front of you and we can just walk through it together, basically page by page. And feel free to break in with a question at any time. This is completely for your benefit. It's your orientation. And so just let me know whenever you have a question. You can either raise your hand or, we're a small group, so you could probably just unmute and ask to speak. Let's see, I think we should also note for the record that we did not have anyone here to comment. Like, we can see who's participating and we know that no one has showed up in person either. So that's one reason why we're continuing on down the agenda to the board orientation. So let's start at the beginning. So here's the board book. I made a table of contents. I feel like it's a lot of text in this book, but once we walk through it, I'm hoping that it'll be clear as to the useful parts of it. Like, how do you use this book in your role as a board member? So what I've put together here is some basic board information, then the board orientation information that I'm going to go over specifically tonight. Then we have a section for agendas. So I put the agenda in there for tonight, and I'm also realizing we need to have a section for minutes. So I just dropped the whole minutes thing this time, but we will add that in, and then we'll get you the minutes and we'll approve those next meeting. Okay, then we have application review guidelines, and I have a whole section in there that we will go over tonight because we are changing some things. The city feels like we really do need to have a scoring system in place because it helps things be more objective and also transparent. And so I'll go through that with y'all and just walk you through step by step what we're thinking, how it will work, and then just please feel free to ask questions. The next section in your book is the agency applications. So what you'll see in that section 5 tonight is that we already have 3 applications. And so we have put those in there. I have heard from 2 out of the 3, and I feel sure I'll hear from the 3rd one that they are able to present next week. So we can go ahead and have a meeting next week. It'll be 3 instead of the usual 6 presenters. I think it'll be good to have a starter meeting like that where we can just have 3 and then have discussion and kind of see how it works and work out the kinks. So section 6, we will give you an example contract once we have a new format for the contracts, just so you can see what people are signing up for. And it basically has all the legal language for the city. And then it also has their scope of work, their performance measures, their timeline, and their budget. And so we'll just give you an example contract just so you can kind of know, like, this is the format. It's the same for everybody. and then a note section with some paper in case you want to use it to take notes. So let's turn the page. The next page in the book is a list of all of the applicants. So you'll see right now it's a large print, short list. We have 3 so far. I have been getting questions. We know it's probably going to be 30. That's what I'm guessing. And so the deadline is this Friday. And once we have all of them in, I'm going to revise this list and you'll have a complete list of all the applicants in front of you. So you can see how much they requested and so forth. Now, let's talk about the funding just for a second. The total amount available is $990,120. So almost double what y'all usually have to offer. Most of that money is from the general fund. However, 150,000 of it is from the American Rescue Plan. So because those are federal dollars, there's a little bit more criteria. They have to be a little bit connected to the pandemic, but we've looked at the requirements. And for those applications, and we'll go over this in more detail, but there are specific little requirements that the agencies would have to meet in order to spend that $150,000. They are very broad. So if they are serving people who were unemployed recently, who have had increased housing or food instability. So for example, they serve homeless people or so forth, food bank, whatever. Or if they are low to moderate income, which is almost everyone, you know, like a large number of people in the city of San Marcos. If they have an income of less than 80% of the area median, then we can, if they serve people like that, then we can include them in the list of applications that qualifies for the American Rescue Plan funding. I think because it's so broad, we are going to have no trouble assigning some applications to that funding source. Once y'all decide who gets the funding and how much, we'll tally it up and we'll make sure that, okay, we've spent that 150,000 on agencies that meet the criteria, basically. So that's the long version of saying, we will mark on this list for you which agencies meet that criteria. You can see that the 3 that have applied so far all meet the criteria. And so I think we'll have no trouble spending that 150,000. I just had to bring it up because we're going to have a little bit different criteria for those. Okay, so we'll update this list after Friday when everybody turns their applications in. So let's go to section 1. Here you have just the board roster, some contact information, staff support, our contact information, and then the website for the board. So y'all have a website. We will post like the agendas, we'll post, we could post minutes. I don't know. We can post all the applications up there, information about any calls for funding. It's already up there right now. So like our application process, that's part of us broadcasting it, it's on that website. Next page. In this section, I just included some information that you've already seen. So this is the advisory board's update that I sent on August 5th. I just figured it would be handy to have as a reference. It tells you, you know, contact information and just some basics and so forth.
Hey, Carol.
Yes, ma'am. I see your hands up.
It looks like we've been joined by Wayne Thompson. I wanted to verify if he is a board member.
Okay, he is not. And so we could, I think it would be right to.
We will leave him where he is in the attendees. He can hear everything that's being said. I just didn't want to leave
Okay.
a board member out of the discussion.
Okay, perfect. Now, do we need to stop and go back to the citizen comment period, or have we passed that in the agenda and we keep
No,
going
ma'am.
with the orientation?
We have moved on beyond that item on
Okay.
the agenda.
Okay, so we will keep going. Okay, so I'm on the page. That's the board update. I'm turning it. Then I put in a copy of the PowerPoint that I gave at the applicant workshop, just in case y'all were curious about what we went over with the applicants on that workshop. Let's go to tab 2. So this tab is what we're going to spend a lot of time on this evening. So I'll come back to it, but it is information about the board itself, a little bit of nonprofit 101, and then the details on the application review process. So we will come back to that. Tab 3 is where the agendas go. And the minutes, it's going to be the minutes too. Tab 4 is where we've included some information for you. So the first part of it is a blank application, because the blank application has the instructions in it. And so I just thought it would be handy so you can keep in mind like what we were asking people to provide in their application. When the applications come in, staff is going to check to make sure they're all complete. And one of their requirements is to submit their 990, which if they are a 501c3 nonprofit, and also their independent audit. Those things we're not planning to include in the packet, but just know that we'll check to make sure they're there and they are absolutely available to you. We're just trying to save paper. And it was my understanding, y'all, typically don't get that level of detail. You just know that it's been done and they're in a appropriate standing. Okay, so blank application goes on for a few pages. Let's see, 7 of 9, 9 of 9. You can look down at the bottom corner to see the page numbers. Once you get past page 9 of 9, this is a tally sheet. So everybody has a table. Right now it only has 3 agencies on it. When we have everybody, I'll add to the list so that you have a place to tally your scores for every agency. So I'm hoping that'll be clear and you can just, that's kind of your summary. Like once you're done, you can just write it in from your notes and then it'll all be right there on one page, or it'll flow to the back. We also have in this section just some sample questions. These were the questions that were previously used on site visits. And one thing that's new and different this year is that we are having the agencies come to the board. Basically, they will be presenting virtually to the board 5 minutes at a time. We'll have, I'm assuming 5 to 6 agencies every board meeting. So hopefully just covering an hour, and then we'll have a half an hour to discuss after that. With the reason we did that is because we feel like that way all the board members are seeing all the information about all the agencies and everybody's getting the same information right up front. Hopefully it'll be a little bit more efficient process as well than having people go do a site visit, take the time to do that, and then have to take the time to come back and do a presentation on what they found and so forth. So this is what we'll be doing this year. And so anyway, we included some sample questions. When the agencies are here presenting, y'all are welcome to ask anything you want. We have limited the Q&A periods to 5 minutes. It's my understanding that in other grant processes, sometimes they do like 3 minutes and 3 minutes. So I'm hoping 5 minutes feels longer than it sounds. We will try it. Next week will be a good example. And if it just doesn't work for us, then we can change it. But we're going to try 5 and 5. Okay, moving on. I'm not seeing any questions, so I'm going to keep moving on. We're just kind of going through the book and then we're going to go back to the details. Okay, section 5 is where you find the actual applications from the entities. And what we're giving you is everything they've turned in except for that audit and that form 990 that confirms that they're a 501c3. And we've separated each application with blue paper. So your homework for next week will be to review what you have here. I would encourage you to go ahead and score based on the application, or at least get your thoughts down and start thinking through it. And in your packet, let's see, it must be in section 5. We didn't do this for staff, but I believe it's section 4. In your packet, you have a set of 25 scoring sheets. And so what we're thinking is that you can use that to take notes for each agency. So you could put the name of the agency at the top, and while you're going through the application and then while you're hearing the presentation, you can make notes on it. And then at some point, either based on the application or both, you decide the score for that agency. So we'll go in more detail on that. Okay, let's see, section 6. is where we're going to give you an example contract. We're still working on the format, but we will give that to everybody once we have it. And then section 7, you can see is just notes. So going back, let's go to section 2. First page is basically a table of contents for the section. So let's flip the page. So now it says page 2 of 8 about the board. So I wanted to give you just a little background because I don't know that you've had sort of the official description of why this board was put together in the first place and what's the legal underpinning of this board. So the way it works is the laws of a city are ordinances. That's how the city council passes laws. And they are all put together in what's called the Code of Ordinances. So they're quote codified into this. Basically, it used to be a big book, right, of the laws. So now it's online, but I gave you your section. It's in this tab. I'll show you where it is in just a second. But what the Code of Ordinances does is it formally establishes that this board exists. So this is the city council declaring that there shall be a Human Services Advisory Board, and here's why we're creating it. It talks about the duties of the board. So if you'll flip back, it's actually the last 2 pages in this section. I put a little cover sheet on it that says City of San Marcos, Texas Code of Ordinances, and it tells you where to find it. So if you go to the whole big book, or now it's a online, internet list, you'd be going to the General Ordinances section, Chapter 2, Administration, etc. And you get down to Division 9, which is what creates the Human Services Advisory Board. And so it talks about why does this board exist? And now I'm thinking, where did I write that down? I think there's a better summary statement. It's in the bylaws. Okay, we'll keep going. This says that this board exists, and it talks about in order to fulfill specific duties related to human services, and it lists the duties. So you can look at that later. Please do. But let's keep going. So go back to about the board. Okay, next thing that happens once the board is established, the board itself creates the bylaws by which it runs. So bylaws are always about how the meetings are run, which officer has responsibility for what duties, who's going to take the minutes. It's all of that sort of thing. And so let's look at that. Flip through this section and you will see another little cover sheet with a heart on it because I was feeling love. And it's labeled bylaws. And so it just tells you the bylaws are the rules by which the board functions. Now, the board created these bylaws in 2007. And at that time, I'm sure it was a good representation of how the board was run. It is quite out of date. It doesn't really even match what y'all have been doing for the past few years. So at some point, like I'm thinking next year, all of us can get together and I can facilitate working on these bylaws and we can make it what we are doing now, basically. So we're trying to conform to the spirit of the bylaws, if not the letter of the bylaws right now. So it does provide a good summary statement of the purpose of the board. So the Human Services Advisory Board is responsible for the development and enhancement of human services in San Marcos. So that is a pretty big job, development and enhancement of human services in San Marcos. And so really you're not just seen as, oh, these are the people that review the applications every year. Really, you have a sizable scope of work that is described here. So it's kind of exciting to see that, this is what you're about. The bylaws are also where the definition of human service agency is found. This was worked on, I guess, in 2007. And so, for example, this is what we included in the application. So these are the types of agencies that these funds seek to support. And it just says a human services agency is an organization that seeks to improve the quality of their clients' lives by providing, facilitating, or recommending support for an array of basic social, physical health, housing, and mental health services to needy clients in the community. Surprising aspects, what it does not say is a nonprofit. However, that I think is assumed because a city does not generally give tax dollars to a for-profit corporation. That would be just highly unusual because, you know, their tax dollars, they are the citizens' money. We don't hand them off to somebody who's going to make a profit on it. So nonprofit is assumed that that's the type of agency we're really looking for. What it also doesn't say is 501c3. So while we look for 501c3s, and while really that does give you assurance that they have a certain structure in place, they are set up well, they've got their tax exemption in place, et cetera, they don't have to be a 501c3. They can be a new nonprofit that's starting out. They could be a church that is doing charitable work, and so not a 501c3. They could be a foundation. Sometimes foundations are formed for charitable purposes, not necessarily under 501c3, but they would still maybe fit this definition. So once we get those applications in, you're going to get every complete application that we receive, period. If it's an incomplete application, we'll let you know, like, hey, we're just giving you parts because that's all we have and we're going to work to get the rest. But they couldn't be funded without a complete application, you know, or we'll, you know, hold it and we'll just be like, okay, we're really working on this one. We'll try to get you the complete application in a few days. You'll get every complete application. So part of what you need to do is look at this definition and just make sure that you feel that the agency meets this definition. So that'll be sort of job one. Presumably everybody who applies will, but you just never know. Maybe somebody will pop in and you're just like, no, that it just doesn't fit. And so we can have that discussion at the time. Okay, so sorry, turn the page. There are the actual bylaws. The official deal. You can see that it's a copy of a copy of a copy. We're gonna have to track down the Word version once we're working on them. It talks about, you know, the rules of conduct for the meetings and so forth. I think that y'all are, as I have heard, a smoothly functioning board. I don't think we have to go through these in detail, but if we ever came upon a question, this is what we would review to see what the answer was about how we should be doing our business. Okay, so let's go back to that page 2 of 8 about the board. One thing I am asking is please do go ahead and look over the bylaws and the code of ordinances. I think it's informative. It kind of gives you an idea of who you are and what you're about. Next thing on this page, I wanted to bring up the question of who sets the requirements for the applications and the funding. I actually still need to do a little bit more research on that, but I am certain that it is either one of two things. Either the board, y'all set the application requirements and the requirements for receiving funding, or you recommend it to the city council and then they discuss it and approve it. So either way, the board has a lot of jurisdiction over who gets funded and even the details of what we should be looking for in the applications and so forth. So I bring that up because as we start this process, as you're going through, please write down side notes of anything you'd like to see done differently. Because in addition to working on the bylaws next year, we can kind of have a recap meeting at the end, like not in November necessarily, because we'll all be like, okay, we're meetinged out, we're ready for Thanksgiving. But, you know, starting in the spring, we could have a couple of meetings to go over how did we think the process went? What do we want to change about it? What do we see as missing in the application requirements or the funding requirements and that sort of thing? So really feel free to take notes as you go, because then you'll remember at the time when we have that meeting. So last thing on this page, just a quick note, you'll see that the meetings are posted as special meetings. That's because the bylaws just call a regular meeting a once a month meeting in this board's bylaws. So I went ahead and continued the practice of calling every meeting basically a special meeting. Really, we treat them in this board as regular meetings. The only difference is you cannot be booted off the board automatically by missing special meetings. However, this is a technicality. I thought I would bring it up. It is kind of odd that it's posted as a special meeting, but these are the bread and butter meetings of this board, the meetings that we have every week now through November. So your presence is really important. And so I just want, that's a little technicality, like if it was posted as a regular meeting and you missed 3, then you might be booted off automatically. We don't have that technicality in place for us because of the way the bylaws are worded, but your presence is really important. And I don't, like I anticipate seeing you all just about every meeting. Okay, quick nonprofit 101. So turn the page to page 3. We wanted to go through just a little bit from a couple of angles. So number one, I've already kind of opened that can of worms up. Who can the Human Services Advisory Board grant funding? So it turns out, doesn't have to be a 501c3, does have to be a nonprofit. Cities don't give money to for-profit corporations. And so I've put some details here on this page. What I'm trying to convey with all of this text, and y'all can read it at your leisure, what I'm trying to say is 501c3 is a section of the Internal Revenue Tax Code, the federal tax code. And the reason people refer to nonprofit organizations as 501c3s is they're a specific type. So the IRS has a really good definition of charitable organization in the middle of that 501c3 tax code. And so people refer to that because it keeps the focus on, we're funding organizations that provide charity to people. We're funding organizations that have the purpose of helping people. So some organizations have the purpose of, I don't know, celebrating history or whatever example. Okay, well, actually, we are really looking for service organizations. So that's why we tend to really look for 501c3s. The other thing is, in order to be designated a 501c3 organization, it means you're tax exempt. That's all it means. Like that's where it comes from. It's from the Internal Revenue Service Tax Code. But you have to have a certain structure in place. You have to either be a trust, like formal legal trust. You have to be a formally formed association with, a board and so forth, or you have to be a corporation. So like registered with the state of Texas. So you can see it's a little bit, it's a higher level of organization. It really puts the structure in place for an agency to be legally viable and really, sort of successful in their mission to provide services in a way that uses people's money wisely and transparently. So that's why we tend to look for 501c3s. But I did just want to bring it up that they don't necessarily have to be that specific designation. So do I have any questions so far? I just wanted to take a break and check on that. So, okay, hearing none, I'll just keep going. Feel free to jump in. Okay, next page of Nonprofit 101. What structure leads to success? So we just talked a little bit about, to be a 501c3, you have to have a legal structure in place. So I wanted to go through this just a little bit because this does affect our scoring a little bit. This is something that we can use to look at to see, is this agency really ready to serve people? Do they have the structure in place where they've got the accountability for the funding, they have a program plan, etc. So let's walk through this just really quickly. Okay, so you decide that you want to serve people, and people, of course, people have big hearts and they want to do a really great mission. However, there's a business side to this. So it really is literally running a business. And so in nonprofit, of course, just means that you don't have money left over at the end that you share with stockholders or that you keep as a profit. You can fund staff, You have people working for you and you can pay them, but you're not there for the purpose of making money. You roll the money back into serving the people and paying the staff. Okay. So you have a mission. First of all, in order to form a nonprofit, number one, you really need to be able to prove that there's a need for your nonprofit in the location that you're setting it up. I can't think of a wild example, but you get the picture. You wouldn't want to set up a nonprofit, I don't know, that gives out heavy coats that's located in Mexico. Like they just like mostly don't need them. So prove the need that you want to serve and be able to talk about that need so that you can tell funders, this is the urgency. Here's why we need this funding. We've looked around, we've looked at studies or surveys, or we know that the city in such a way that we can prove our funding is needed for this specific program. Okay, number two, set up that legal structure of accountability. So create a corporation or a trust or a defined association. Generally, you create a board of directors because that gives that level of oversight that reassures funders like us, we're a funder. It reassures them that more than one person is looking at the money. And also, I guess it's really twofold. More than one person is also making sure that agency is staying on its mission. So if they start an agency to serve blind children, they aren't suddenly serving pets as well, unless they change the structure, like they do a deliberate change of here's our new mission. And so a group of people can help keep things on track better than just one. You also need to create an organizational chart. And so, as part of the packet, we ask for an organizational chart of each nonprofit, and it helps us see, how does this really work? Like who's doing what, who's over what, who's telling who what to do, all of that. You go ahead and create programs, discuss formally, what are you going to do? What are you about? How do you serve the need that you have proved that exists? And then of course you create job descriptions. And so this literally is a business. And so they have to have all the things that you think of in a workplace. Everybody has to have a job description. Everybody has to have a scope of responsibilities. You can't have, for example, only one person handling the funding. You've got to have oversight of that so that it doesn't suddenly fund someone's retirement in a different way or whatever. Okay, so you get your structure going. Okay, number three, generally people then file for their 501c3 tax exempt status. Why would you want to pay taxes if you don't have to? And so that's where that number, and letter combination comes from. You apply to the IRS and you say, according to section 501c3 of the tax code, I should not have to pay taxes because my mission meets the definition of, and usually they're talking about it meets the definition of a charitable organization. And so then next step, number 4. Oh, and also just quickly, I try to include some informational resources. Like for example, you may not know that you can look up individual charities on the IRS website to see if they're really a 501c3 and or where their standing is and so forth. Okay, number 4, selecting an independent auditor. So this has levels to it. If you're a very small, you don't necessarily have to have an independent audit. But once you hit, I would say 100,000 in funding, which is not that much if you're running programs, you really do need to pay someone, an auditor who is a certified auditor, to come in and look at your books. And what they do is provide that report every year that says, I've looked at their books, things are happening in the way that it is stated that they will happen. This person handles the money, this person oversees it, and so forth. They're spending according to their budget, and so forth. And it kind of lays it out for the public like, yep, this is a legit organization and we can see how they're doing business. And then the auditor signs it. Like they're signing it like, I have done this audit according to regular auditing principles, and I'm telling you this organization is on the level. And so that's why it's important to have that. That's why we ask for it, you know, every year, and we want to make sure that people are having an independent audit. Okay, next, number 5. Any nonprofit, in Carol Griffith's view, needs to plan to publish an annual report. This is part of attracting funders. It's part of getting the word out about your mission. It's part of telling the story of your success. And so if you plan that ahead of time, you can be thinking of, oh, I've got to take pictures as we go while we're having these programs so that we can put it in the annual report. And the annual report is another source of information about the organization. And so if it's a relatively, you know, like a well-established organization, they've been around for a little while, a few years, they may have a website and they may have an annual report. And those are places where you can look for information about the organization, specifically what did they do last year, and some pictures, you know, just to see like, what did it look like? What are they talking about? Okay, you also have to, number 6, create policies and procedures. So that is, policies are about like, how much are you going to give to whom? Who are your beneficiaries? It's setting the when, where, why, who, what, how sorts of questions in place. Who are we serving? What criteria do they have to meet before we will provide service to that person? And that sets it out. If when you put it in writing, it gives you something to refer back to when somebody comes up and they're like, well, I need help. You'll be like, it doesn't fit the mission of our organization, or yes, come right in. We'll be happy to help you. And it helps funders see what your organization is about. Procedures are the step-by-step, like for staff and for volunteers, especially that list that tells them step-by-step, here's your job duties and here's what you do. Here's what you do if something else happens. Here's who you go to for help if you have a question. It's all of that, you know, it's like the meat of how to run the organization in detail. Those are really good to have. A business has policies and procedures. Governments have policies and procedures. Nonprofits are basically businesses that don't keep money over what they have used on their programs. They're not there to make a profit. Okay, next, you have to obtain funding from a variety of sources. And so this is something that sometimes it's hard to fathom how many different funding sources it really takes to fund an organization. And so we get all wrapped up in like, we're human services grants of City of San Marcos. We've got our rules and we are here to fund this organization. Why aren't they responding to us very well? Okay, well, it might be because they have 10 or 12 other funders with their own rules, and they're trying to meet each of these funders' rules. Some of their funding could come from a foundation, and the foundation has a specific purpose, and they've got to make sure that they show their programs meet that specific purpose. Some of them, like us, are looking for specific outcomes. So like this year, we're really trying to emphasize outcomes. Not just how many people did you serve, but what did the people get out of it? What was life-changing about your service? What really helped these people? So we want to see outcomes, and we're going to ask them to describe them in their quarterly report. So this is kind of just that section where I'm like, we have to realize, I guess, you know, that we're one of a group of funders, and some of these organizations have quite a few, and they're kind of balancing what they can do with what their funding sources will allow, or what the mission of their funding sources is. It's a real, it's a little bit complex. Something just to keep in mind as we're trying to, you know, work with the organizations or see how we fit into their picture, as we're seeing how they fit into our picture. Okay, next, finally, number 8, you finally get to running the programs. Okay, so you've gone through all of these steps to get your nonprofit in place. And I guess I wanted to emphasize that because just having a good idea just wouldn't do the same thing as having all of this in place. So we're looking for organizations that they could be new. They might just be setting up things like this, but we want to see the intent that they're getting organized and they're legally putting their act together and so forth. So then they run the programs, And then they report on the programs. So we will be asking organizations as usual to do a quarterly report. Last year, and maybe the year before that, I'm not sure, it was changed to every 4 months. We are changing it back to quarterly. That fits, as far as I can tell, like through the survey I did and so forth, everybody's normal reporting schedule. It fits the city's normal reporting schedule. It fits the agency's normal reporting schedule. So we'll get reports 4 times a year, and we'll be asking for outcomes. And we can share those with the board. It doesn't have to be something that's just that you never see. Like, then you can see the good that you did. Like, hey, look at these reports coming in. We can see what's happening with the funding. You will also have, of course, those quarterly reports to look at with a little bit. Now they'll have a little bit more detail on the organizations. So you can use them next year. If the same organization comes to you for funding, you can look back at the quarterly reports and say, well, did you use the funding as you had intended? Did it go well? Did you serve the number of people you thought you would? Was it more? Like, do you actually need more funding? And so forth. So we'll have that as another resource for next year's review of the applications. Okay, we'll keep going. And so next part, take a deep breath. Okay, get your mindset. Next part is about application review. And so this is a little different. So I wanted to walk you through it, and let me get you to, let's go. Okay, so you're going to be looking at 2 tabs at once, but hang on to the application review process page, and then look at or take it out even under section 4. There's that blank application. I'm going to take it out for my own convenience. Excuse me. Okay. So in the application form, we included for everybody who was applying so that they would know how they're going to be judged. We included the evaluation criteria and the risk assessment. So if you look at page 8 and 9 of the application, you can see that this is, we told the applicants, this is what we're going to be looking at when we score your application. And what we're going to do is every board member is going to score every agency independently. So we expect y'all to not necessarily talk amongst yourselves very much. I know that you are a social group. You might talk a little bit. We don't have to hold to like the public works standard of nobody talks to anybody else, but it is expected that you independently come up with your own assessment of these agencies, and you use these criteria to consider each part and score each part. So for example, community need and justification. So now I'm looking at the evaluation criteria that I pulled out of the application. It's page 8, community need and justification. And so you're looking to see, have they documented the need for this service? Like, it could be the best service in the world. Like, oh my gosh, this really tugs on my heartstrings. But the question is it needed in San Marcos? Is there a way that you can tell by their application that yes, this fits our community and we really do see that it's needed? Or is it more like, well, it seems like it would probably be needed, but they didn't really provide proof. Like, we're guessing. And so based on that, you give them, from 0 to 25 points. And we know, of course, like on any committee, somebody's going to be like the harsh scorer. Like, you have to be perfection to have 25. And somebody's going to be like the sweet person, bleeding heart. Oh, they tried. I'll give them 20. That's why we have multiple board members, because then y'all are all across the board. You put in your own knowledge, your experience, what you know of the community, what you think is important, and you make judgment calls on these based on what you think. And so then that's where the tally sheet comes in, because at the end, we'll be asking you to submit the tally sheet. We will also be asking you to submit your notes, the evaluation criteria, and the risk assessment. But let's not go over that just yet. Let's talk about the tally sheet. So I'll give you a tally sheet that lists every organization that's applied. And I'll want you to fill in across the table, okay, for the evaluation criteria, item number 1, which is community need and justification, this organization gets, in my mind, a 15, or this one gets a 5. And so then we'll have y'all turn those in first so that we can put them all together and give you some idea of where each application stands. And so I don't have a specific method to talk to you about tonight, but I'm going to be working on, what's the easiest way to put together 7 people's scores in a way that y'all can really get the picture of what you're seeing for this organization. There's different, methods. So I'm going to look up, play with some ideas on how we can do that in a meeting where we can go over the scores in a pretty quick way. One way we'll do it, we may do it too, is like if we see the extremes, like, oh, everybody is really clear on this organization, and we can just be like, okay, look, they're in. Okay, let's go talk about the ones that people are not sure about, and start the conversation that way. So I will try to have a pretty well-defined process by which the discussion can be had using the point system and the information we have. It seems like a lot, but I want to make it pretty clear. For now, what you're focused on is read the applications, look at all the information they've given you. Of course, go on their website if they have one, look at their annual report if you want to, or you can just use the application, because we asked them to provide all the information we wanted to look at in the application. So you don't have to do extra if you don't want to. It's just not necessary. But you go through this evaluation criteria sheet. So there's 4 parts. Each one is worth up to 25 points. If they simply do not address it, like let's say, so one of the parts is the implementation. Are they able to show you and me, like exactly, like how are they really going to do this service? And maybe they just blow that section, like they didn't include it at all, or they're like, oh, trust us, we'll get it done, or something crazy. You can give them 0 points if you just think it was just not addressed. And so it's just the full range. If you think that you can see that, wow, they really have their act together, like they are very clear in how they're going to go about providing the service, okay, they can have a 25. So that's kind of what we're looking for. If it feels like you can't wrap your head around it, or it's like kind of too much, focus on just the titles. But if the underneath helps you focus on it, focus on that too. So for example, in the implementation section, the program will be evaluated on the following factors. The application demonstrates that resources needed to manage the proposed activity are available and ready. So one thing to think about as you're scoring these agencies is, have they shown that they have enough money to do the program they're proposing, not just from us, but also other funders, because we'll fund half the program. Do they? And so are they saying, well, we've applied for it, but we don't know yet? Or are they saying, yes, we have it in place? Or are they saying we're not sure yet? That would affect their score. Also in this same category, we're looking for clearly defined objectives, focusing on results and measurable outcomes, instead of maybe a description that's just about, we're going to serve X number of people. So outcomes, what we're looking for there is, how does it impact that person's life? So instead of saying, let's see a good example. Instead of saying, for example, we're going to put 7 people up in a motel to get them out of the heat because they're homeless. Well, that's, an output. You've got somebody out of the heat. It does affect their life. A real outcome for them would be, we are providing case management so that we can assess their needs and see how to get them out of homelessness. So we're not just kind of maintaining the situation, we're trying to help them get into a better situation. That's the outcome. It's like real life impact is how I see it. That's like the shortcut that I use to think of an outcome. So that's the quick view of the evaluation criteria, this is where we're also, I'll go ahead and go through a couple more. Okay, so impact and cost effectiveness. That's where it gives us a space to like really look at the application and be able to compare different applications to say, well, this one, it has a good program. They have an awful lot of overhead. They have a fancy building. We would be funding, you know, the rent on that building, et cetera. Our program dollars don't go as far. Whereas this one has a little bit of overhead. They run a pretty lean operation. It's not fancy, but they get a lot of good work done. Well, they would get more points because they have a low overhead. They're a lean organization. Also, do they have other funding from other sources? Have they gotten out there and tried to make their agency stable by having additional funding sources? In addition, so jumping then to number 4, community support. So we did ask everybody to submit 3 to 5 letters of community support. I think it'll be fun to read those. We'll see, you know, who they get to support them and what the letters say, and does it make the point of the impact they have on this community, our community. And so that's another judgment call for y'all to make, up to 25 points. Do you feel, based on the letters of support, also how many volunteers they have or the role the volunteers play in their organization, and then also, are their board members active? Like, can you look at their application and tell this is one really excited person and 5 board members that show up once a year? Well, that might be kind of an unstable organization. So maybe our money is better put in an organization that has a bunch of people that are working together. So maybe we look for an organization that has, it could still be one person. These may be small organizations, but if they have a board of 5 people that are in there every month, and they're looking at the records and they're volunteering for things and they're pretty active, well, then you have 6 people working on something, and it's a lot more stable. And so we feel like our money can go into this organization and do well. We think this organization will still be there next year and still serving people. So in addition to that criteria, we also have a risk assessment. Don't get hung up on having 2 sheets to fill out. I would say that the biggest, the impact, the most important one is the evaluation criteria. This is where you're really looking at the organization and how they're running their program. So put your main attention on that. We do also have, though, a risk assessment, because this will help us compare, and it kind of makes a chart where you can easily see which organizations are just not that risky. They've been around forever. They've been doing this program forever, or they're just starting a new program, but they've been really successful at a bunch of other ones. We think, you know, any money given to them is going to just roll right on through and do what they said it was going to do. Okay, well, they will have a very low risk score. So low risk is low score. If it's a new organization, no matter if they have the best plan and the best people behind it, they're a little bit riskier than somebody who's been doing it for years. You just don't know how it's going to come out. So they'll have a higher risk score. So higher risk will be higher score. This is just a way to compare each organization kind of quickly, but with some very specific thoughts in mind, like, are they running a complex program? So if it's a pretty simple program, I don't think I'll name something crazy and y'all will laugh at me, so never mind. But if it's a pretty simple program, basically, you know, you're moving this block to over here, and anybody could do it. That's not very risky, so not very many points. If it's pretty complex, maybe they're working with a complex population, or they're really trying to create some big impacts that may happen over time. That's riskier. The program could fail easier. And so they have higher number of points, higher risk. Next one, project experience. So that's where we're looking at how long have they been in existence. Next one, number 3, program or project funding. And so that's where we are looking at, do they have other funders? Are they well funded? And so forth. Because if they do, it is lower risk for our funding. If we're putting in a high percentage of a program and it fails, then we've put our money into something that we all hoped would work, but it didn't. And so then our money did not achieve something for the community. So that's why we're doing this risk assessment. We really want to look into, well, we want to fund organizations that are relatively good risks. So if somebody's off the charts on this category, we may want to look at it pretty seriously. Like, well, maybe that's just too risky. We could put our funding in these other organizations. We have a limited amount and we know we'll do good. So that's why we're doing this. Next one, recipient organization. What we're trying to look at there, and this may be a little bit of a repeat with project experience, but what we're trying to say for number 2 is, do they have experience doing this program? So maybe the organization has been around for a really long time, but it's a brand new program. Okay, well, that's higher risk, even for an established organization. But number 4 is about the organization. Has the organization been around for a long time or not? So I think I may have said it wrong the first time, but anyway, that's the distinction between those two. What we'll probably add next year, you can see it noted on here, is history. So we do get a lot of the same people asking for, or agencies, I should say, asking for funding, because it's not a huge community. You know, we have some organizations who are here and working. So we'll start just looking at accountability for their history with their human services grant funding, this specific funding. Did they do with it what they said they would? Did it go well? What impact on San Marcos did it have? That sort of thing. So at this point, I do want to check with y'all again, just to ask, do you have questions about evaluating the agencies or looking at the risk assessment?
Yeah, Carol, I have a question. If you could clarify for me, I'm the non-voting social work advisor, and this is
Okay.
my 3rd year on the board, but this is a lot of structure, and I'm wondering where I fit in with that in my role.
So I actually need to call you and talk to you about that a little bit, because, and I'm sorry, I just, I haven't had the time to do it yet, but we do need to talk about that, because we can see in the bylaws that your position was intended to be an advisor. And so one thing I'm picturing, and I don't know how it's been done in the past. Like, I haven't even asked Joanne and Mary, like, hey, how does this work? So, but I am picturing, once we're in that sort of half hour of discussion at the end of each meeting, if, sorry, I'm getting a message about my internet connection. If they have questions about how a nonprofit functions, or what is this service, how does it work, or a little bit more technical details, I'm picturing that they turn to you, and that's where you can say, here's my experience, or here's my training. You can give advice on industry standard, what social workers want to see in an organization versus maybe something that's not as well organized. That's what I'm thinking. I'm going to be there as facilitator. So I'm also non-voting, but I'll just be trying to make the meeting move along, and then just like bring out, if one board member never says anything, I'll be like, so what do you think? Does that answer your question about your role?
Yes, and I look forward to kind of touching base with a little more clarity. Do you intend for me to use this rubric after each presentation in the same way that other board members would? Just curious.
To me, I think it would be helpful. We can't really count your scores in the final table. I think it would be helpful to you, for one thing, to have to go through all of the applications, and so you're really seriously familiar with them as well, so that you can give advice. I also think that we can put them up there sort of separate. Like, okay, well, here's what our resident expert says. Here's what the board says. Does this give us more information? So I would encourage you to go ahead and do the scoring.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay, sure thing. Anybody else with questions about the specific, like, agency application review or evaluation? Okay, I will keep going. What I also did want to be sure and talk about, I kind of, went through the details of reviewing a specific application. I realized I should have perhaps first gone through the broader picture. What do the meetings look like? Okay, so let's go back to, so now I'm still in tab 2, and I'm on the page that says the application review process. So here's the big picture. We expect to have about 30 applications. I think that's typical. We'll try to schedule 5 or 6 for 5-minute presentations. We will keep time very strictly. Staff will do that. We'll call time. And then there will be 5 minutes of Q&A. So what I'm hoping is that you'll kind of come with some questions, and then while they're presenting, hopefully you'll think of other questions. We have specified to the organizations, and we'll specify it again when we're setting up the schedule, that they are not to repeat information that's in their application. We don't want a regurgitation of what they've already submitted. This board reads the material, they take it seriously. So what we want to see is examples in action. And if it's a new program, for example, okay, tell us about examples in other cities, or how you came up with the idea, or what effect you think it will have, sort of that more active visual representation of what the program will be. So that will happen each week. You will know ahead of time who has been scheduled for the following week. So we're going to be scrambling that first week because we'll have all the applications in, and then it's Labor Day. And then we're trying to schedule somebody for the following Tuesday. But I do think we will be able to get, 5 agencies to come in on that, the next Tuesday, which will be like the 14th of September. So we already have 2 scheduled for sure for next week. I'm thinking it'll probably be 3, and then we'll have 5 or 6 following. And you'll know, okay, so the point is you'll know ahead of time which 5 or 6 are going to come up the next week. So that way you can break your review up into bite-sized pieces. And so my thinking is you can just review those 5 or 6 that week. Hopefully you'll kind of get into a rhythm of it, and you'll get used to the process, and it won't take as long as it may seem right now. And so I would encourage you really to review the applications in depth prior to the meeting, do your scoring, do your risk assessment, be ready with some questions. Then the agencies come in and do their presentations, boom, 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 Q&A session. Then we should have about half an hour left over for the board to discuss what they just heard and talk it through a little bit and just get a feel for where people stand or what you're thinking and so forth. I wanted to make sure and provide that opportunity. I'm going to need to think through still, a little bit more about how we want to structure that discussion, but I don't by any means mean to make it too formal. And so we will want it to be kind of a sharing or thought processing, because this is an awful lot of applications to go through. And so I feel like without that sort of discussion time at the end of the presentations, it's just too much. So this will help you remember who's who, get your thoughts down, make some more notes. You can change your scores at that point and so forth. Let's see what I've also put here. I just want to make sure I go over this page. Okay, so we will be asking for your notes. These are public record. This is part of making the process transparent and objective. So showing people that that we really did have each individual board member looking at these agencies and so forth and giving their own opinion. Don't worry if your handwriting is terrible. Just take notes, if you have personal opinions on the directors, leave those on a different sheet and don't submit it with your evaluation, okay? But here are some questions you may think through. I was trying to kind of cue you on this sort of thing along with the evaluation sheet. What I was also mentioning on this too is as you go through this process, do make notes on the side about anything you would rather see done differently next year, because we'll have a chance to talk about that early next year to get that set up. What else? Okay, so then we go through all these meetings with presentations of by the agencies. talk about it for about half an hour each week. Then we'll have a final 1 or 2 meetings where we really sit down together and look at the scores. Excuse me. So I'll be asking you, at the end, okay, give me your tally sheets. We'll get it into a scoring, sheet so that we can somehow absorb the information. We can use colors or bubbles or something. We'll work it out. And then we'll have a couple of meetings where we can really hash it out. So you'll have 2 decisions to make. Who gets funded and how much do they get funded? And so we'll try to have sort of a process by which we can have that discussion, maybe make it fun. I'm a planner by trade, so we have all kinds of like little exercises where you go put the dot on the agency or whatever, just to make it sort of like a interaction exercise. I did put in a note on site visits. I'm hoping that this process saves everyone time. You are welcome to do a site visit. If you want to, I'm asking you to let me know, because then I can put the opportunity out there to others so that we're not like having 3 or 4 different site visits by interested board members. So that would be a lot to ask of the agency. So we want to coordinate a little bit now that I've sort of messed with the whole process of having one agency assigned to one board member. What we also need to be aware of is this is a public board. So if more than 3 board members are going to go on a site visit together, that is totally fine. We just need to post it as a meeting. And so we tell the public this many board members are going to go visit this organization to get more information. I would kind of, I guess, a little bit discourage site visits only for this reason. It is that if board members go to visit one agency or 2 or 3, and the other 27 are not visited, they're going to be wondering if those other ones had an advantage. So you might just consider that. But I did want to let you know the options there. It's not prohibited or something. So any questions about sort of the overall process that we've talked about here? And we are getting to where I'm going to wrap it up. So I see that it's 8:15 and it's getting late. So let's keep going. Page 7 in this section is about American Rescue Plan funding. I'm actually really not worried about this. This is where I give you the information about what makes an application meet the criteria for that $150,000 that we got from American Rescue Plan. What I anticipate is that most of the applications are going to meet the criteria especially because of the low to moderate income service criteria. Many times the people who are being served are low to moderate income, and the agency tracks that in some way. So we could assign them as like, okay, you got part of that American Rescue Plan funding. We may need to have you track a little bit additional in your quarterly report, because we are going to have to turn in separate reports to the federal government. Now, they tried to make it really simple for this American Rescue Plan. It is not like other federal grants. And so anyway, I don't want you to worry about that. I think it will work itself out in the end. It is, I guess, one more decision we'll have to make at the end. I say we, it's really y'all. I'll facilitate the conversation, but we will have to assign who is getting that $150,000. Could be a whole bunch of agencies, could be one. It just depends on how it falls out. But then we'll track those agencies as, okay, these people receive this funding, and we'll submit the reports to the federal government. Okay, next page. So after the board's decision, what happens? So in those couple of meetings at the end where everyone's talking through the final scores, who's going to get funding, how much, we end up with a formal board recommendation. I'll be the staff member who takes it to city council and says, here's all the agencies who applied. Here were some factors considered, kind of give them a picture of what we were looking at in the application and in the requirements very quickly. And then let them know, here's the slate of agencies and the amounts that the board recommends, and here's what they don't recommend. And here's why, just basic discussion points. The city council, as you know, has the final decision. They will make it a decision either, yes, okay, the whole slate, just like you said, or they could pull one and say, no, we don't think they're ready for funding or whatever, or they could increase a dollar amount here and there and so forth. They have the authority to do that. I would expect that in general, the recommendation of the board is taken very seriously. So y'all are about to help allocate almost $1 million. So after that, agencies will be asked to submit performance and financial reports quarterly. This board is a little bit different than what I'm used to. So I'm used to federal funding. It's reimbursement basis only. Okay, well, this is already set up where agencies have budgeted and they're expecting like, okay, if we get this funding, we'll get it up front every quarter. Payments start in January. And so we're going to go with that this year. We're not going to mess with it. If we do decide to mess with it next spring, if we decide to change the process in any way, we will have a whole lot of discussion with the agencies about what works in their budgeting process and so forth. We'll make sure that it works for them and they don't have to skip payment for a quarter or anything like that. So we are not messing with the payment system. We are still asking for more outcome-based reporting. So it'll end up like they'll get paid in January sort of automatically. Most of these get 1/4 of their funding every quarter. Bam, they get the payment in January. They don't have to turn in a report until April about the first 3 months and tell us what their outcomes were. So it's a little bit disconnected. We're not basing their payments on their outcomes. The contracts will have some provisions for if we see that this is not going well, or that they just spent their funding on painting the rec room instead of serving the actual children lunch, like they said they were going to, then we can cease the contract. We will have some provisions in there, and you'll see it in the sample contract that say, if we can tell that it's just, it's not working, we can stop the payments. But it'll be a little bit delayed. But there won't be an immediate repercussion because we won't know until after they've already gotten their next payment. So just a heads up about that. But we'll see, but that's just, how it's set up for this year. Okay. What else? Okay, so that's the whole orientation basically. We've already gone through, the other things in this section, which are the bylaws, code of ordinances, and so forth. Let's see if there's anything else I need to talk through. Just real quick, let's talk about next week really fast. Section 5, we have 3 applications. We have one from CASA. We have one from, which is a court-appointed special advocates for foster children. We have one from the San Marcos Housing Authority. And we have one from School Fuel. These just happen to be the ones that we already had. So we were like, hey, let's put them in there. Now you'll have a week to review them. So what we're expecting you'll do is go through each of these in detail, read what they've submitted. If you have questions or you're like, I really would like to see the audit on this one, then just contact me and I'll provide that information to you. Use your scoring sheets, do the evaluation criteria, and then also the risk assessment. Feel free to make notes. Like, yes, they're public record, but I've been a public employee for a long time. I mean, we have to do it, for example, when we're hiring a person. And so you're like literally writing criticisms of this person as you're going, but it's like, it's part of the hiring process. I'm looking to see if they are meeting the job criteria. So you're doing the same thing. Do they meet the criteria? Are they in good shape? You're evaluating them. You really are making judgment calls. That's your job. That's your role. And so that's specifically what you're supposed to do. What, shouldn't be done. I mean, you can just imagine. No personal comments, blah, 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 etc. If somebody wanted to do an open records request, maybe they'd be looking for prejudice, like, or prejudgment, I guess I should say, like assumption that, oh, well, this one will automatically get funding. No, we're really looking at it, we're really objectively trying to evaluate them as a requester and their program to see, does this fit San Marcos well? And so, and then I guess prejudice of the other kind too, you know, like any prejudice doesn't work. And so I wouldn't expect that from anybody anyway. So just feel free to just put your thoughts down on paper. We package it all up and we put it in the file. And then if somebody does an open records request, it's there. Any questions about what you're doing for next week? So, oh, let me sum it up. You're doing the evaluation criteria beforehand, put your thoughts on paper, do the risk assessment, think through any questions you might want to ask them after the presentation. What will happen is they'll come in and we'll schedule them in little sections of time. Here's who's first, second, third. They'll do their thing and so forth. So I guess I've gone over it enough. Does anybody have questions about that process or what we're looking at next week? Okay, so that said, next week we'll try to make it a really clear process as we go. I think it's good that we'll only have 3 because then we can kind of, you know, if we need to refine our technique, that'll be great. This is really all I have to present tonight. Happy to answer any questions. My contact information is here. Please feel free to ask questions. If you ask something that is like, oh, I should have thought of that for the whole board, you know, I might answer to everyone, like just in a, you know, like, oh, here's the answer. I think everybody would be interested in this. If it's something just for your own help, like, hey, help me understand this a little bit better, I'm happy to do that as well. That could be just, you know, between us just working through the details or the process. So with that, I guess I'll turn it back over to Joanne. Just, oh, and we probably need to check the agenda to see what's, that was the presentation. Oh, okay. So what I put on the agenda, so I'm really having the presentation and the discussion, like I'm kind of putting that out there. I did put a section for reports just in case anyone had something to talk through. I think it's been since November that y'all have met. And so there is a section for that on the agenda, and then also future agenda items. If you specifically want to see something on a future agenda, now would also be the time to bring that up as well. So Joanne, back to you.
Am I unmuted? Okay. Oh, wow, this was exactly what I needed. It's a lot more than what we did in the previous years, but I understand the need for the change as well. So, yeah. Also, I think I was asking if, and I may have overlooked it, do we have the information from last year of how much each agency was given? I know that we usually have those. Do we need to include it, or?
I didn't think of that, but, and I think you had brought it up before too. I will get that to you because we do have a summary. I can just email it to you. Yep.
Okay. All right. I think that was it. Does anybody else have any questions or any comments? Okay, if not, I guess we can move to adjourn until next Tuesday, 7.
So Chair Parsons, I'm going to hop in really quick just to say that we do have question and answer with the press and public. We should
Okay.
acknowledge that that's on the agenda. And
Okay.
I'm looking around the library, nobody is here. So now you can move on to adjournment.
Okay, thank you. I move to adjourn. Does anybody second?
I second.
Okay, Mary. Okay, we will go ahead and adjourn the meeting. until next Tuesday at 7 p.m.